Hi everyone. My name is Paul Adepoju, and I'm the community manager for the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. And this forum has been our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've been striving to improve the knowledge capabilities of journalists in different parts of the world who are dealing with different conditions and still strive to improve their careers and to actually be the best journalists that they can be, despite the challenges and limitations presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've discussed several issues, topical issues from different sectors. And one of the things that really resonates well with our audience are skills that are geared towards improving their act, their practices. And investigative journalism is actually one that is really, really crucial and important to most of the journalists that are part of this forum. And but while it looks much easier to do per se for written journalists, some of the toughest investigative journalisms to do would be those that would require you producing multimedia content like pictures or even videos. Sometimes when you walk around and you just want to take pictures of individuals with just your phone, you may not call much attention. But when you have to actually shoot these reports in 4K high definition and you have to bring very large cameras and put it in the faces of people, it may be extremely difficult. Those that would actually be willing to talk to you when they see you showing up with cameras may actually be reluctant to do. But there is a major news organization that has really advanced the frontiers of investigative journalism, and I'm talking about the BBC. And just this week, they published a mind-blowing investigation on cultism in Nigeria, and the investigation, from what I read, took at least a duration of 2 years to put everything together. And and this is not just the first that we'll be doing. I've been following this team for years and I've always been impressed by what they do. And that's why I'm here today at the BBC in London to actually learn from this team so that we can expand our knowledge base on how to carry out investigative journalism. So the goal for today is to provide, I know we cannot finish everything in 1 hour, but at least to provide lay the groundwork for and encourage or inspire and provide some guidance for journalists in different parts of the world that are interested in doing some undercover investigative journalism for multimedia outlets. And this actually, even though it's the last webinar for the year, is actually the first that I'll be conducting in person. And so I'm really glad to have right next to me Charlie Northcott, who is the producer for BBC Africa. I know you would think I'm lying, but Charlie is actually right next to me. So Charlie, say hi to our audience.
And thanks very much for having us.
Okay, so one of the things that I would like to start with for Charlie is let's start with the concept behind the BBC Africa High investigation. So what is the rationale behind what you do, and how are you able to put
So Africa Eye was created to try and pioneer investigative journalism in parts of Africa which where it's really, really challenging to do that kind of work for local journalists. So often, if you're operating in that part of the world and you live there, it can be really, really difficult to take on big targets, to expose corruption, to expose organized crime, because it's very, very dangerous and the possibilities of backlash are huge. So Africa Eye was created to try and basically forge another generation of African investigative journalists and to empower journalists on the continent to tell bigger, more ambitious stories to kind of hold power to account. We have kind of 3 streams of investigation, all done in a video format. So the first are forensic investigations, where we use open source techniques to analyze data online. So it could be an atrocity that's been filmed or human rights abuse that's been filmed, and we can use special techniques to kind of verify that footage and find out where it took place and so on. The other strand is undercover filming. So we build teams of undercover reporters who go out to capture evidence of crimes or corruption and to expose that in the form of a documentary. And then the third strand we have is access-based investigation, which is about going to places that would ordinarily be too dangerous or too difficult. And so the most recent documentary published was an example of that. We spent 2 years getting access to a very powerful organized mafia in Nigeria in order to expose the links between the group and politics. So yeah, those are the three strands of investigation that we do. And I'm here with my colleague, Pete, who's also a producer based in Kenya, who does this work alongside me.
Yeah, so thank you very much. You've already mentioned Pete, so I'd like to bring Pete on board. So Pete, I'd also like you to tell us what you do and how did you start off with investigative journalism, especially considering the fact that you are there in Kenya, in Africa, where there could be more serious repercussions for locally based journalists that are doing this kind of risky investigative journalism. So let's go through your venture journey into investigative journalism and how you are practicing presently.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, so I'm Pete, and I'm a journalist from Kenya, and my investigative journey begins, and actually I'd say I also do a lot of access-based films, and one that comes to mind was one called Suicide Stories, and this was a film about basically the crisis on mental health, and especially with men linked with toxic masculinity. And that topic was really important, but also it was one of the taboo topics because men were really struggling to talk about their mental health. And I think Africa Eye was advantageous doing this story with them. Partly was because to get the access to this film, I had to be in the community for 2 years. And for 2 months. And if it was just a normal local journal, basically local broadcaster, they would not have the time to do that. So that's something that Africa Eye brings to the table. They give you the time to get the access, but also the time to develop the story. But also, more importantly, and this comes to the issue about resources, there's a story we did in investigating trafficking of especially women from Kenya to India. And when they get to India, they're exploited to be sex workers. And what was really important, and especially for Africa, like duty of care of the contributor, because we worked with a whistleblower who was exposing the people that had trafficked her. And the risk that comes with that is after the film is out, we had to work very closely with high risk at BBC, but also make sure that she leaves India, comes back to Kenya, but also coming back to Kenya, have a proper basically resettlement plan and having ongoing contact with her to this day to make sure that she's safe, but at the same time, she exposed the people that trafficked her. So those are some of the things that I do.
And I would also like to bring on, I'd like to bring Charlie back on because Charlie, you will agree with me that what you do is not like a conventional reporting because, what's your mic? It's not like a conventional reporting because every now and then, like Pete really said, it takes a lot of time to put these things together. So let's start with choosing what to investigate. How do you choose this particular topic, this particular issue is worth investigating for us to commit this large amount of time and resources to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's something we get asked a lot, and the kind of pitching process for investigative stories is different to ordinary stories. So, often we get people approaching our team saying, I'd like to investigate, corruption in government, or, the epidemic of drug addiction in this city, or something along those lines. But they're much too kind of surface level for what we look at. And a lot of people, when they come to us, struggle to understand the difference between a topic and an investigation. And one of the key elements of an investigation is clear targets. Who is it that you're trying to expose? What kind of criminal activity is it you're trying to expose? What kind of behavior is it you're trying to expose? And how we choose what to focus on is always evidence-led. So it depends where the evidence is coming from. And that evidence can come to us from various different places. So sometimes you're approached by whistleblowers who have extremely rare access to a certain hidden underworld which people haven't seen, and that person's bringing secret documents to the table, or insider knowledge of something that no one else knows about. So it can come from whistleblowers and things like that. It can also come from just overwhelming popular demand. So the investigation we did into sexual harassment by lecturers in Nigerian and Ghanaian universities was essentially a crowd-supported investigation. We'd been seeing in the comments on BBC platforms, lots of members of the audience from Ghana and Nigeria asking us to go and investigate how lecturers are blackmailing students for sex in exchange for grades. And it was that triggered us to go and start looking into that. We've also done our own research. So we've done surveys of sort of major population centers in key African countries, where we surveyed people on WhatsApp, asking them, what do you want investigated? What is it that you feel you needs to be exposed in society? And we had overwhelming feedback from people. And we've actually gone out and investigated and started investigating these ideas, which have come to us by popular demand. So essentially, the goal of an organization like the BBC as a public service broadcaster is to serve the public. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to do the investigations that civil society demands and that people demand. And often they're really deeply entrenched problems or issues that are causing people a huge amount of suffering or frustration. So, in Nigeria, for example, there was a terrible issue with opioid addiction, which are, drugs such as codeine, which have a legitimate pharmaceutical use, but were being sold onto the black market by pharmaceutical companies and causing huge and terrible amounts of addiction in the general population. And this was causing people in the country a lot of distress, a lot of anger, and no one really knew what to do about it. No one really knew who to blame. And so we went out to go and expose how individuals within these pharmaceutical companies were selling these opioids out the back door, onto the black market. And the way you approach these investigations is it can be really dangerous and challenging. So for example, on that investigation, we had to ourselves pose as buyers, illegal buyers of the drugs. And the undercover filming is a two-step process. Essentially, you do a number of months of gathering evidence of, who are the individuals who are doing this kind of illegal activity. Once that evidence is gathered, it's submitted to internal authorities within the BBC, who assess that evidence and judge whether it's strong enough or not. And then it's only once we feel like the evidence is overwhelming that we're able to then go out with secret cameras and start filming. So it is a long process, and like you say, it is a huge investment to do this kind of work. So generally we try and pick stories which are coming to us by popular demand. They're things that the people really, really feel is necessary in society and the people really feel they want. One of the things we've come across through Africa Eye is there's this sort of feeling, sometimes in the Western media in particular, that people want more kind of positive news stories. People want sort of things that are going to make them feel happy in the news, and there's too much bad news. But what we've seen through our surveys is, in equal measure, there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration in a lot of societies, and people want investigative journalism. People want to see bad people exposed. They want to see crimes exposed. They want to see government held to account. So we have a huge amount of popular support for our investigations, and that's really key to why the BBC wants to put funding into this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that really extensive explanation. And but before I ask my next question, I know questions are already coming in. So if you are watching on Zoom platform and you have questions for our guests today, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A function on the Zoom platform to ask your question. And if you are watching live on the Facebook live stream, please use the comment box below the live stream video for your questions. And so I would like to bring in Peter from Kenya right now to join on this question that I have. If you look at in the UK and a lot of other countries where central databases can easily be accessed, you can easily make some trackings, you can follow some data, some public data easily accessible, and you can be able to independently verify some claims much easily. But we have journalists that are in some parts of the world where central data are not easily accessible, and what you do, the part of the world that you cover seems to be dealing with this kind of issues. And I remember watching one of the investigative journalists, one of the investigative pieces that analyzed an extrajudicial killing in an African country. That I think it was in Cameroon, if I'm right. Yeah, that the government claimed the individuals that were killed, there were some wrong, faulty claims by the government, but you actually you're able to analyze from the types of gun to the badge of the army. You use geosatellite data to actually put these things together to convince the audience that this was actually done by government soldiers. So when you work in this line, how do you decide how to go about it? Because some journalists do complain that we don't have access to these resources, we don't have access to this information. So how do you still get top quality, globally standard and sound reports out, even when you are in a region that these information are not easily accessible?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I think in the recent years, the biggest advantage is open source investigation. And what that does, it means sometimes even from the comfort of the bedroom, you can basically have access to a situation, like there's an incident, like open source can be a very useful tool. But what is lacking actually is the training and the skills. But that is something that Africa has done. They've had workshops in open source. And we've been trying to bring that skill up, and it's a very, very useful tool to have right now. And I think it's one of the most revolutionary things that have happened in the recent years in terms of journalists having access to answering questions that are really critical. But the other thing that's also very important, and I think in any journalism, is sometimes the information is there, it's just to know where to look. And the biggest trick to this is local knowledge, working with the right people, like who can point you to the right direction and basically can open those doors. And I think sometimes, and this is true in all African investigations, it's like a partnership. It could be with journalists in the country, but sometimes it's a partnership with citizens, because they have the access to the critical information, they can point you in the right direction. And we bring in the journalism of basically making sure it's verified, making sure the ethics stand up. But to me, the perfect scenario is working with this partnership with people who are actually living in the communities where the stories are told. That's where the power comes in the storytelling and in the journalism. And yeah, that's what I have to say about this too. Open source is big boost, but also working with people from the communities where the stories are being told.
Yes, so the questions are already happening, and I think I should quickly get one or two questions out before we start going to this. So, Charlie, what do you see as very important tool? What are the tips for independent journalists? They're on their own. What can investigative journalism, undercover investigative journalism, be done by independent journalists that their organization does not have as deep pulse as the BBC? So if you're in that kind of situation, what is the go-to strategy?
I think undercover work is really difficult and dangerous, and it's not something I'd recommend anyone do alone. When we do undercover filming, we do it as a large team, and as Pete is saying, we do it, in coordination with people with, very good local knowledge on the ground. And whenever someone is undercover, there's a team around them ready to intervene if something goes wrong. There's a system in place to protect them and to make sure it can be done safely. I think if you feel like you have a really good undercover story, you can approach organizations which will have the resources to help you do it safely and to help you do it well, like Africa Eye. And Africa Eye can help you develop that story. Africa Eye isn't a closed team. We work with a network of upwards of 150 freelance journalists across Africa. So we work with people who are not BBC journalists all the time, and they're integral to our stories. I'd say, as many as sort of 60 to 70% of the people who work on our investigations are not BBC staff members. And so just because you're a freelancer, working for a small media house, doesn't mean that you can't form a partnership with organizations like Africa Eye, who can help you with the training and with the resources and with the technology to do that kind of work. But at a more sort of fundamental level, in terms of thinking about undercover filming, it's important to recognize that for all journalists, undercover filming is a last resort. It's not the first thing you try and do when trying to do an investigation. We only really use that technique if we feel like there's no other way to capture the evidence. So, the opioid story is a good example of that. There was substantial indications that individuals in pharmaceutical companies were selling opioids illegally onto the black market. And no matter how many testimonies you gather of that kind of behavior, it's never going to really convince people until you capture that activity on camera and you capture people actually doing that. The other thing to remember about undercover filming is you don't just rush into it. It's evidence-based. So you'll sometimes spend up to 6 months gathering evidence before you actually expose someone, because you have to weigh up the ethics of that person's right to privacy and the crimes which are allegedly being committed. And you have to be overwhelmingly certain that there is enough evidence to justify taking the radical step of breaching someone's privacy in order to record their behavior. So when we were exposing university professors who were sexually harassing students in Ghanaian and Nigerian universities, that process of undercover filming, that prior to even getting the secret cameras out, we spent 6 months or more speaking to students and gathering first-hand testimonies of people who said they'd been harassed by those lecturers. We were also gathering text message evidence from students who'd had text message exchanges with those people, a huge body of evidence. And in the end, the against some of those individuals was 55,000 words long. And I mean, you have an enormous amount of evidence before you even begin to start up undercover filming. So don't rush into it. It's not something you do, just out of the blue or in a rushed kind of way. You need to be very careful in the evidence gathering process in terms of the risk of the undercover filming itself. And I'd recommend, if you feel like you have a story that really needs undercover filming, seek partnerships with organizations that do have the resources and the the capacity to help you do it safely and to help you do it well. There's a huge amount of legal risk and physical risk to that kind of work. And so it's useful to partner with people who can help you with those resources.
So Pete, what additional advice would you like to give out?
So for me, secret filming is, as in Charlie said, like is a last resort, but also you should, before even you begin the process, you should not be what you call like fishing. It's not like we're going trying to see if a crime or a wrongdoing is being committed here. Like you have to be absolutely sure that it's in public interest to expose the story you're trying to tell. So it's something that we have to be very, very careful, but also something also very, very important in secret filming is the basically duty of care to the journalists who are filming, because mentally it's really challenging. Actually, you need a lot of bravery. So it's something you have to go step by step, like walk them through and hold their hand, but also for them to make sure they don't feel alone, like before the process, during the process, and after the process. That is something that's so important. Like they have to feel that in a team and it's in a family, and they have the support that they need. And it's absolutely crucial because, as you say, like mental health is paramount, very important. And that's the advice I'd give.
Now, Charlie, so people always complain. I think you will always see things when I was going around earlier, when I was around talking to colleagues, seeing what is happening here. There is this. It seems as if investigative journalists are celebrities. Sorry, those that are the faces, they always feel like celebrities, and they are always revered in journalism. And they seem to be the people, many in the ecosystem, journalism ecosystem, sees investigative journalism as the hallmark. But you can see that some people are actually agreeing with you. Tosin Omani said, undercover your reporting is a last resort. So when you look at this, when you look at all of this, and you see the, is the risk worth it? Putting everything on ground, putting everything on the line, for us to be able to better understand the risk. What has been some of the burdens that your team has been faced with in the process of this? What stands out to be a major burden or impact that what you do has had on your team that the general public is not aware of, that you think should be out there?
Yeah, I think it is really dangerous, this work, and it's particularly dangerous for people who live and work on the continent permanently. It's you're often exposing people who will fight back after the investigation comes out, and that could be in the form of physical fighting back, or more commonly nowadays, fighting back with personal attacks in the media or in the digital realm. People use fake news as a weapon nowadays to try and discredit investigations, to discredit the reporters in investigations, to target them personally. Journalists get killed all the time, and so we have to be really, really careful. And it's something that, as a team, we take it really, really seriously. We have had to relocate people because of threats. We have had some scary incidences where reporters have faced physical violence and threats of physical violence at gunpoint from crowds of people who mistook the reporters for human traffickers. There's lots and lots of examples from things that have gone wrong. In terms of the risk assessments around these things, again, like Pete was saying earlier, local knowledge is really key, but also having a plan. So when we publish an investigation, it's not like you just publish it and then everyone goes home and we all sort of relax. There's what we call a post-TX risk assessment. So there's a risk assessment for what happens after the film comes out, and we have sort of a stage-by-stage plan. So if someone starts receiving death threats online, what do you do? If someone starts receiving physical death threats, what do you do? And we try and preempt some of those threats as well. So we encourage people to lay low. Sometimes we temporarily relocate people after investigations and things like that to keep them safe. So yeah, there's lots of work that goes around that. And sometimes, there are big teams working on these projects, sometimes up to 15, 30 journalists. But there's only ever one face that you see in the documentary. And so it might be the case that you say, like, some sort of investigative journalists become celebrities nowadays, but the majority of investigative journalists, you'll never even see them. Most of our team, you've never seen their faces before. People have never seen their faces, and they probably never will, because they're out there doing undercover filming. They're out there doing the investigative work, and having a big public profile isn't helpful for that kind of work. So yeah, it's really important for us to protect our journalists, and I think all of us as journalists are in solidarity with each other on that point. No matter whether you're working in a local media organization or a big media organization like the BBC or CNN or something, we all want journalists to be safe. So it's integral to our work.
Okay, and so before let's take lots of questions. So let's start with Jennifer's question. So let me for Charlie and Pet to answer. The first question is: are you all reporting with COVID? Are your interviews phone only, or you are doing in person too with mass social distancing? I want to dig, but feel hampered by doing it all by phone/Zoom. Thank you, Jennifer, independent journalist from New York. Yeah. So who takes it?
Okay, now I can answer that. Like, we have a protocol in a sense. Like, the whole team gets regularly tested, and we social distance as much as possible. But also, when you're going for an interview, we also try to make it the smallest footprint that is possible to achieve the goal. So, because sometimes, especially the investigation, sometimes you have to meet, because it's very sensitive, and so you have to meet in person. But you just have to social distance, mask up, and test very regularly, and just to make sure that everybody's okay and safe.
Charlie, do you want to add anything?
No, obviously it's really challenging. I'm mute. Obviously it's really challenging operating in a COVID environment. It can be particularly difficult when you're dealing with contributors who view COVID skeptically, or see the wearing a mask as offensive. So in the film we did recently, investigating the Black Axe gang in Nigeria, we call it a cult in Nigeria, it's effectively an organized crime group. Gang members found it offensive to wear a mask, and we had instances where people physically pull the mask off your face in the course of the interview, because they wanted to see you. And so it can be really difficult. It's become one of many risks that you face doing this kind of work. For us, I think our primary responsibility is to make sure that we as reporters don't infect others or spread the virus. And so, like Pete says, we test ourselves really regularly, and we stick to tight rules ourselves on a personal level.
Yeah, thank you. So Thomas from Kenya would like to know, the question raised as, kindly advise on the risk assessment the team carries before undertaking any assignment. And the second question, how do you cover yourself and family even after the story is published? Charlie, I think you should start with that one.
I'd said a bit about it earlier. I mean, Pete can also add something to this, I think. I mean, every risk assessment is individually tailored. You don't have a blueprint that applies to every scenario. But sometimes the kind of things we'll do, sometimes you're already working on your post-fill investigation risk assessment when you're making the project itself. So for example, when you're doing undercover filming, you're very rarely going to be having a reporter doing undercover filming in the place where they permanently live, because there's a high chance that they will face backlash afterwards. And so often you'll sort of work with a journalist. Let's say you're doing undercover filming in northern Nigeria. You might work with a journalist from southern Nigeria in order to do that undercover filming, as a way of preemptively protecting them. You also do a lot of risk assessments around their family and members of their family and how easy it will be to protect them. And we choose, all of these things are taken into consideration beforehand. It's a long process. These risk assessments are lengthy documents, and also working as the BBC, you're not just thinking about the journalist immediately involved in the project. The BBC is a big organization. Sometimes people could target other BBC staff members who weren't even involved just because they've got the brand name attached to them. So you have to think about that as well. It is really, really complicated, these things. But this is where the organization's resources can come in handy. In worst case scenarios, we can move people if necessary. That's how it generally works. But Peter, I don't know if you've got more to add.
That is a really comprehensive. And the only thing maybe I could just add on, and Charlie's touched it a bit, it's you could do the risk assessment during the shoot, you can manage it, but also really importantly is after the shoot. And sometimes that's why, if someone is from the community where the story is being told, it could be complicated, but that's how you have to factor in, is it worth it even doing the story? What will be the personal impact on some of the contributors? And that's something that you need to take seriously, because sometimes you could do the story, it's aired, and everybody moves on, but some of the people that you worked with would be completely get a really big impact for a very, very long time. So that's something you have to weigh in.
Okay, so the next question I'll take is from Tosin Omoni. Tosin writes, how do you overcome this numbness or frustration that comes with some groundbreaking reports not making as much impact as envisaged during the planning stage? For instance, unwillingness of the authority to take action on revelations and exposes. Tosin is with the Premium Times in Nigeria. Charlie.
Yeah, good question, Tosin. I mean, I think I'll take this in 2 points. One is on the issue of mental health in relation to investigations. The other is around impact. Well, we've been lucky at Africa in that a lot of our projects have had substantial impact. But also you can measure impact in different ways. Sometimes impact is about pressuring the authorities to take positive actions to deal with what it is that you've exposed. But sometimes impact can just be about engaging public discourse and creating a conversation. You don't always have to expect, if you always expected some kind of legal change or major impact from politicians, you'd be constantly disappointed. And so sometimes it's just a matter of us internally measuring how many people had a conversation about this issue after we raised it and made more of public awareness about it. And that can affect people in lots of different ways. So for example, we know that since our cultism project came out, a police raid has been carried out on a hostel at a university campus, and a number of automatic weapons have been seized. And that was prompted by it. That wasn't an action that was taken by a politician or something. It was some student on campus had reported that there might be cultists in that vicinity, and some action has been taken. And so sometimes the knock-on effect of these investigations can be quite localized and quite spread, and that's not that's not necessarily a problem. You can measure these things in different ways. Similarly, with our investigation into sexual harassment in universities in Nigeria and Ghana, we only did undercover filming on 4 professors, but in total, approximately 24 professors were fired from other institutions across the continent, in the sort of aftermath and the public kind of conversations that happened about the project later on. So impact comes in many different forms. And when you're dealing with regimes, which are political regimes, which are, in many cases saturated with problems and corruption, you can't expect them to act sometimes. We want them to act, we pressure them to do the right thing, but you can't expect it. And so we have to be pragmatic in our expectations. In terms of the frustration of these things, being a journalist can be very frustrating, and it can be, the mental health toll of doing investigative work can be enormous. You can spend 6 months to a year on a project only to find that it faces backlash, or something goes wrong. And it's something which it can be really, really challenging, is managing everyone's mental health, and particularly I've had friends in Nigeria who've said that everyone in Nigeria has a degree of trauma, and I think that can be the case sometimes. People have a lot of emotional baggage and things which they bring into projects, and it's difficult to manage everyone's mental health around their work. But we do everything we can to support people, and to manage expectations and to manage emotions. But mental health is a very under-explored and under-recognized kind of feature and important factor in investigative work. You have to be really, mentally strong to be able to get through these things. And everyone needs support. Even the most veteran investigative journalist needs mental health support during these kinds of projects. Pete, do you have anything to add?
The thing about impact, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I want to say sometimes you don't need to have arrests or like the community reacting. Sometimes just getting that information out there, like a lot of people can learn from it. But in a sense, and some regimes could just ignore the investigation. But that should not make the journalists to lose hope. Like what you should do, as long as it's in public interest and as long as it's an important story, you should keep doing it, because getting that information out there, and that in itself is a form of accountability. And as journalists, I guess it's our role, because we can only do what we can. So we should not sometimes be really wanting and focusing on the reaction. Sometimes we just have to do what we need to do and let the rest, chips fall where they may.
Okay, thank you. So the last one of it, before I go back to the series of questions, I would like you to, okay. I wanted to just scan through this. Now, when you go to the YouTube, what you're looking on your screen, what you're seeing on your screen is the latest investigative report by this team. Look at the first thing that comes up. If you want to load it on, if you want to watch it, YouTube flags it, and because it's really, it's actually true. I remember, even though I've seen lots of your works before, even though I've seen, look at another flashy warning that comes through again. Now, the reason why this is important is when I was watching this, when it got to the part where the presenter was looking at pictures of decapitated body and blood, I had to just pause it and began to wonder how this person would be feeling looking at all these things. And this person is a person like us too. And so which brings, I'm going to share this link so that you can have an idea of how thorough this team is. And at the end, I began to look at social media and the conversations around how the people's response, which are largely positive. But we still have some individuals that were asking, oh, you could have even gone much deeper. So, Charlie, at what point do you think the investigative report, the investigation is ready? And I think Pete, I think you start, Charlie also, or Pete also contribute. At what point do you think we've done enough for us to go and publish this story? And I think you can also add, answer this question that Betty is asking, from Betty from Liberia. What can you say about protection after Undercover? I know you've talked about it, but the reason I'm raising it is this as second aspect. There are claims that BBC High doesn't provide protection to journalists after the investigation is done. Can you speak to that? So you speak to that, and you also answer the question that at what point when you are gathering this evidence do you think this is enough? Because it's a rabbit hole that you may continue to drag yourself into.
For me, I can say, because actually we work there's a really big team. And when we begin the investigation, we have like a bar that we say when you have this on camera, I think we have proved or prosecuted the case. So it's always self-reflecting. And every time as the investigation is being collected and you're building, you're always, as a whole team, talking about it, discussing about it, is this enough? And also consulting with the editorial policy within the BBC. So it reaches the time, because with the investigation, you can be 100% sure, okay, this will pass the bar. This is enough. But now, especially for us, because it's television, like there's the investigation bit, and then after that, how do you present it into the film? How do you marry that into a cohesive narrative that basically can be a film or a program that viewers can watch from beginning to end in a comprehensive, coherent way that will communicate the message that you're trying to pass. So it's normally in these two bits, like there's the investigation that you have to basically gather the evidence as you go, and once you cross the threshold, which is beyond reasonable doubt, now is putting it together with the film. That's what I'd say about that.
Charlie, you want to add anything?
Not really. I mean, do you want to speak about the protecting journalists issue again? I mean, we can cover it again. But I mean, the bottom line is that this kind of investigative work is really, really dangerous. It is, and we have not, touch wood, ever had an incident where one of our reporters, Africa Eye, has been seriously hurt. So we do a lot to protect our journalists and to protect our people, but it is really challenging. And all of us who go into this know what we're getting into. And a lot of planning goes into making sure that we are safe and that all of our journalists are safe, because the stories that we're telling are some of the most high-risk ones that you could possibly do in the region. And they're often stories which people couldn't do if they weren't backed by a really big organization which had the ability to get them to a safe house or move them to a safe location. So safety is at the forefront of our minds all the time with these things. But ultimately, the reason we're all journalists is because we're passionate about exposing the truth. And we take those risks knowingly. Yes, we do everything we possibly can to keep ourselves safe, but we're also driven by a very, very strong desire to expose bad things and corruption and problems when we find it. So it's different being an investigative journalist to being a lifestyle journalist or a nature journalist or something along those lines. We know that this kind of work is difficult and dangerous, and so we take a lot of measures to keep everyone safe.
Sorry, thanks for addressing that once again. I think you've been able to, I think we can close chapter on the issue of what you do to protect journalists. I just had to say, don't be as if I was selecting the questions. So we have these 3 different questions that I would like to merge because they are saying similar things. For journalists that want to work with BBC Africa High independently, because they are independent journalists, so what is the best channel to get their story ideas across to you? Bet?
There are several ways to get the story to us, because as you said, like, oh, yeah, some loud birds here. Okay. Anyway, uh, sorry, there's some birds there. Anyway, so I was saying, as you said, like most of our stories sometimes actually come from the communities that actually the incident is happening. So if you want to pitch to Africa, you can email us, you can reach out to the various BBC offices. The message will get to us. As you know, like, we are an open book, like all ideas are welcome, and we are here to serve the public, in a sense. Sorry, those birds are really loud.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Do you want to add anything, Charlie? Or that's okay?
Yeah, no, I'd say just on pitching, I just recommend, if people do want to pitch a story to Africa Eye, bring pitches that have got a depth of research. So often we get people saying, I want to do an investigation into, human trafficking, or, I want to do an investigation into organ, illegal organ donations and operations, or something along those lines. And the person hasn't actually got any evidence. They haven't spoken to any people on ground who might be able to help us find evidence. So just bear in mind that with an investigative story, it's about going deep, and it's about looking for depth. And so if you want your pitch to succeed, if you want to work with us, then you can always come to us for advice on how, if you'd like to investigate this issue, how could you go about it? And we can advise and support in that way. We have an open door in terms of people reaching out to us, and we can help you shape your research to get your pitch to a point where it will actually get commissioned. To commission an Africa Eye investigation, it's going to cost tens of thousands of pounds, tens of thousands of dollars. So to make that commitment, the story has got to be really, really substantial. So yeah, it needs to come with something special. So for example, our investigation into this organized crime group in Nigeria, the Black Axe, did not begin with someone saying, let's do an investigation into Black Axe. It began with a whistleblower reaching out to us with 20,000 secret documents. So those documents were the basis of us pursuing that investigation. So just think, if you're going to pitch to us, sometimes come to us for advice, come to us for ideas and support, but don't feel disappointed if it becomes more of a conversation about how that pitch can be improved and can be deepened. We're here to help, and you can reach us, like Pete said, through our channels, or through the BBC as a whole, and the message will get to us.
Okay, so there's a question that I think I also want to ask, but while doing that, maybe Pete can. There's a request from Cyrus for a link, maybe a website, and something that regarding BBC Africa Eye that you can put on the chat box. Charlie, something happened on social media. So I don't know whether you would see it when a particular report by BBC Africa Eye won a major award, and I think was the person that was the face of the report, like you said, got some grant. So I'm trying to understand, how do you attribute, because we are talking to journalists now, how do you attribute credit? Who owns the credit? The major, is it the face, the person that is the face? Who owns the commendations? Is it the person that is the face of the report, or the person that is key, the investigator that isn't the face of the report? I don't know. I think you would see that drama on social media when it was around a particular report that a BBC Africa report that the Face was getting awards, and there were another reporter that were trying to say, okay, this person that did investigations is not getting much attention, and the award money should be shared. So how do you ensure that this does not cause disagreements when a large team is involved?
Well, I think what you said there is the key thing, is that there's a misconception in the general public, I think, about how investigative documentaries are made. They're teamwork. They involve, up to 30, 40 people sometimes involved in projects, and every documentary has a reporter. So there's someone who's on camera in a documentary, and that reporter is got to face a whole load of difficulties as the reporter. They've got to be the storyteller. They've got to face potential backlash and potential threats being the face of the program. But then it's also natural that the reporter gets, additional attention and additional focus, like when these things come out. I mean, anyone who's worked in TV making in the past knows that the producers sit in the background, and the reporter, who's the person on camera, is the one who collects the award at the end of the day. But ultimately, awards are, a collective thing with investigative programs, and we work as a team. And teamwork is you couldn't make any investigative documentary as an individual. It's impossible. These things involve large numbers of people and span many months in terms of their production. So and then in terms of credits, I mean, we don't even generally we don't even publish credits, because it can potentially pose risks to people if everyone's names are out there. So everyone who is involved in our projects receives a credit and is acknowledged, but it's not something we normally shout from the rooftops, just to keep everyone safe. Just like with any project, we have editors, we have a hierarchy within the organization who helps us decide these things and choose these things. But at the end of the day, investigations are teamwork, and a lot of people tend to kind of focus on the personalities of reporters or so on. But these things are very much joint efforts by everyone involved.
I think
just to add,
okay, Pete, yeah.
I'd also say, like, sometimes us as journalists, this is I think maybe our shortcoming. We start focusing so much on the awards, and we forget, and actually the stories that we do about real issues and about real people. So the thing is, the most important thing is that the story was done. The second most important thing is you get the credit that, I think it's unfair if you don't get your credit. But sometimes we as journalists start squabbling over the awards, which shouldn't be that. The big picture is the issues that you're covering and them seeing the light of day. So that's something I think that also is important about the awards. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, and I think we've already answered this question, but this person came again asking the question, the anonymous attendee, that do you have any advice for someone who has never done undercover reporting but wish to pitch such an investigative idea to a media outlet? I know Charlie has answered it, but I will just give the response he gave. Is really something that come to those that are doing it for advice first. Am I right, Charlie? Yeah, so come to those that are doing it for advice so that they guide it properly, so I won't just pitch a concept but it's not really a full investigation. I think I would like Pete to also just officially answer this question.
The one about someone comes to the thing is,
do you have yes, the advice?
The advice, to me, as it's been said before, like secret filming should be a last resort, but also it's something that is risky, so you need to have the right support, the right advice, and for it to be done professionally with the right duty of care. So it shouldn't be something to rush to, especially if you've never done it before. So my advice would be try to get the right people, the right team around you to support you to try and do the story. Don't try do it on your own, especially for the first time.
Okay, I think Noel Thompson, you also like to know whether you're interested in the Caribbean as well. I think the best approach is, like Charlie rightly said, there is a BBC team for each region. I think the region for your team would be the best for you to talk to. Yeah, in case you have any story lead. Am I right, Charlie?
Well, to reach out to us, yeah. I mean, our team is specifically focused on Africa. Is focused on investigations in Africa. But if anyone has a story they'd like to pitch to the BBC in general, then you know, we have reporters covering the entire world. So you can always reach out to the BBC if you feel like you've got a good story from another region or another area. Yeah.
Then the last question, the last public question I'll take is Jennifer, and Jennifer is asking, the question reads as, is there a list we can join to offer freelance reporting help when you need a correspondent on the ground in our location? In other words, I'm in New York and could be a local source for a BBC investigation, so you don't have to travel. A listserv or network for this kind of mutual aid. Thanks. Charlie.
Understand the question. So let me just read a list we can join to offer freelance reporting help when you need a correspondent on the ground. We don't have sort of lists per se. I think every part of the job of a journalist is sort of having a network and having a contact book and having a contact list. But you know, we're constantly looking for new contacts and new people to reach out to us. We have sources from all walks of life, from, you know, taxi drivers working on the streets of Lagos to government officials, you know, people from all over the world and all walks of life can collaborate with us like that. But in terms of us having a kind of centralized list of correspondents or contacts, no, there isn't anything like that. It boils down to us individually. So within the Africa Eye team, we have essentially lead investigators who are sort of full-time producers, like Pete and our other colleagues in Nigeria and Kenya and other countries. And those lead investigators will build teams around themselves and help construct the stories. So yeah, the door is open to anyone who we feel could contribute substantially to an investigation.
Yeah, we are already beyond the 1 hour mark. So begin to wrap things up now. So I'd like to start with Pete. Pete, as what are your last remarks, and what are your projections for investigative journalism in 2022? What do you still think this ecosystem should pay attention to in terms of how investigative journalism is done? So, and what are your last remarks?
To me, I'm thinking right now actually looks like the investigative journalism, especially for me, like I'm in East Africa. I think it's more putting people accountable to power, but also working more with the communities and empowering the communities. Because as we know, especially in Africa, like investigative journalism is almost non-existent, but partly because of there is like a hostile, oh, the birds have gone again, and we're almost finishing. Like basically a hostile environment, but also the training is lacking. And the thing is, the beauty with Africa, like it's working much more with local journalists, working with people from the communities, and basically they shine a light where it needs to be shown, and hopefully make a difference.
So Charlie, what are last words? What do you think? What are projections for 2022 in investigative journalism? And there is this question I also would like you to answer, which is please, no specifics. Like how many how many investigations do you do at the same time?
well, I'll answer the stats question first. So we do 20 investigations a year. So there are multiple ones running at the same time. And we've got things which we're working on now, which we know will be very explosive in 2022. A number of us, when you always have as an investigator a number of projects on the go. So it's not just like you have one at a time and you spend your time working on that one project for 6 months. You'll be working on multiple projects simultaneously over a long period of time. So it's 20 investigations a year. Out of those investigations, we aim for, around sort of 4 or 5 of them to be really, really high impact. So yeah, that's what's coming. So there'll be some really powerful stuff coming next year from Africa Eye. We only started a couple of years ago. We built an infrastructure of, over 100 investigative journalists across the continent from scratch. And we've been training people, we've been doing workshops, we've been doing everything we can to basically increase the amount of kind of investigative resources available for journalists on the continent. And so we hope that there'll be some really, really powerful work to come from a lot of the kind of next generation of investigative journalists we've been working with and training. So in terms of the future of it all, I mean, I think everyone knows investigative journalism is so important. And as Pete said, it has to come from the ground. We're not sitting here in London plotting plotting targets or choosing stories out of thin air. We're relying entirely upon people on the continent telling us what it is they want investigated. And we're relying on journalists on the ground, people from these communities to help us tell these stories and to help us investigate these things. So the main thing I'd say is if you have something you really, really want investigated, please come to us, because these investigations are driven and revolve entirely around people on the ground. And so, yeah, that's all I'd say, really.
Yeah, this is, I think we use your mic.
Oh, okay.
So this is how I want to sign off this year. It's been an amazing session for us, and I always believe that even though journalism is an endangered profession, but the thrills that people at these investigative journalism team, what they pull off every day is always impressive. And on behalf of the entire ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum, from my boss, Stella, who is on the background, ensuring that everything works together, I just want to say thank you very much for attending our session this year. While they did 20 top quality investigations, I think we're also able to do much more sessions. And next year looks promising. I hope my dream is to be able to go around like this and meet people in person, talk to them about their careers, what they are doing. Hopefully sometime if I come to Kenya, I'll be with Pete. But I know Pete will be hiding. He wouldn't like to come out and show his face like this. But whatever it is, we hope for the best in 2022. And I want to say thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you, Charlie, for having me.
Thank you, everyone.